Bienvenidos y bienvenidas quienes ahora se unen en esta segunda parte de nuestro seminario. En la mañana tuvimos una serie de actividades muy interesantes en sesiones plenarias, sesiones simultáneas y una plenaria virtual. Entonces, para poder empezar a tiempo, esperemos a ver si algunos que están afuera reclamando algunas cositas se pueden unir.
No
No
problem.
¿Me estás escuchando, Edison?
No problem, Adriana. We are here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, no problem. Dame un segundo para que tú presentes a la profesora. Bueno, en esta tarde teníamos el gusto, lo digo, aclaro por qué, íbamos a tener en persona a la profesora Rossane Pessoa, nuestra plenarista de Brasil. Desafortunadamente el día de ayer la profesora no pudo viajar porque la aerolínea le exigió la vacuna de la fiebre amarilla. No conocemos a nadie que haya venido de Brasil a Colombia, que le hayan exigido la vacuna de la fiebre amarilla, ni nosotros en los últimos viajes recientes a Brasil nos han pedido la vacuna de la fiebre amarilla. Ante esta contingencia, la profesora no le permitieron abordar el vuelo y para hacer un cambio de manera que ella pudiera estar en el seminario, la multa era de más de $1,000. Entonces, apelando a lo que tenemos con las nuevas tecnologías y a que la pobre ayer se estresó el día, no se imaginan cuánto, haber llegado al aeropuerto, irse de su ciudad hasta Sao Paulo y en Sao Paulo que le digan que no puede viajar, fue bastante complicado. Sin embargo, pues tenemos ya, gracias a su generosidad de estar aquí y a los colegas, vamos a conectarnos con ella y esperamos que en un futuro muy cercano ella pueda venir a visitarnos. La presentación de la profesora Rossane Pessoa la hará nuestro colega Edison Castrillón, profesor de la Universidad Católica Luis Amigo. For those of you who do not speak Spanish, so we're going to have the plenary talk by Professor Rossane Pessoa. She's from Brazil, and unfortunately she could not fly yesterday because the airline demanded from her a yellow fever vaccine, and we don't know of anybody who has been recently requested to submit that vaccine, that certification. Unfortunately, she couldn't leave the country, but she's here thanks to technology. So I leave the room to Professor Edison Castrillón from Universidad Católica Luis Amigo. And thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you so much. Então, boa tarde para todas, todos os presentes. É com imensa satisfação e honra que nos reunimos nesse espaço de aprendizado e reflexão. Hoje temos o privilégio de contar com a ilustre presença da professora Rossane Rocha Pessoa. Ela é professora titular de língua inglesa no curso de letras e no programa de pós-graduação em letras e linguística da Universidade Federal de Goiás. Possui graduação em letras modernas, inglês e mestrado em letras e linguística pela mesma universidade. A professora Rocha Pessoa também tem doutorado em linguística aplicada pela Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais e também realizou estágio de pós-doutoramento no programa de pós-graduação em estudos linguísticos e literários em inglês da Universidade de São Paulo. Rossane é um exemplo de como a paixão pela pesquisa e troca de conhecimento podem superar barreiras culturais e linguísticas. Aguardamos ansiosamente suas palavras inspiradoras, na esperança de que suas ideias nos motivem a explorar novos horizontes e a questionar criticamente o mundo que nos cerca através da sua fala. Essa fala que é titulada Problematizing the Civilization Crisis language lessons as a site of resistance and re-existence. Professor Rossane, thank you so much for being here. And one more time, welcome.
Thank you. Buenas tardes. Es una pena que no hable español, así que hablaré en inglés. I'm Rossane Rocha Pessoa. I'm a full professor of English at the Universidade Federal de Goiás, Brazil. Since 2019, I've been working as a voluntary professor dedicated especially to the post-graduation program in Letters and Linguistics of my university. I'd like to thank CNPq, the Brazilian National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, for the Research Productivity Grant since 2018. I'd also like to mention that together with Professor Kleber da Silva from Universidade de Brasília, I'm the coordinator of the Cerrado Network of Critical Language Teacher Education. So I'm not here alone. Some of the reflections I bring here today result from the various discussions and partnerships we have in this collective. The Cerrado Network is linked to the National Literacies Project, coordinated by Ana Paula Duboc, who has already been in this event, as I've been told, and Daniel Ferraz, both from Universidade de São Paulo. As Edison has already said, the title of my presentation is Problematizing the Civilization in Crisis, Language Lessons as a Site of Resistance and Re-existence. First of all, I'd like to thank Adriana Moncada for inviting me for this plenary, and Edson Castrijon and Liliana Maturana for answering to all my questions and being so kind. I also thank you, Edilson, for the presentation and for presiding this plenary. Unfortunately, I couldn't board to Colombia yesterday, as Adriana said, because I didn't have this certificate, international certificate. I'd never heard about it. How frustrating it was. However, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to make this talk in this prestigious university, an important city in Colombia, which aroused my curiosity when I studied South American countries in high school. Reflecting on it today, I can only think of the way countries are represented by stereotypes that reduce reality and naturalize specific aspects of it. That's why I only watched one episode of Narcos, the Netflix series. But I read that in 2013, Medellin was chosen as the most innovative city in the world by the Urban Land Institute due to recent advances in politics, education, and social development. I also read that it has completely changed because of social and cultural projects that have transformed the lives of its population. And this is the change we want to see in the world as a result of different types of initiatives, both at the micro and macro level. I'm very enthusiastic about changes in Brazil at the moment with President Lula. By the way, as it was mentioned this morning, Lula is in a meeting with the President of Colombia and other leaders of Amazon nations to talk about the future of our rainforest. Oh my God, my slides are not moving. Yes. An even bigger initiative are the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the theme of this event, and we hope it can result in a better and more sustainable future for all. We know how challenging it is. We know how challenging these goals are, and I could see it in a debate on the progress and implementation of these goals held in February this year. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group, said that halfway to the deadline set out in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, some advancements have been made, but we are badly off track. After decades of progress, key indicators on hunger and poverty are going to reverse, the climate emergencies are accelerating, and inequalities are growing. Also, in February this year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that we need to go further and deeper on climate, on conflict, on inequality, on food insecurity, on nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons. We are closer to the edge than ever. And he added more bleakly, time is running out as the world inches closer to meltdown, and countries must change course before it's too late. Sorry, my slides are not changing. Yes. Thus, we should all take action. As Mohammed argues, it's not an agenda for the others, but for us and for everyone. In fact, we cannot be in this world with gloves in our hands simply as observers, as Paulo Freire said once. And as language teachers, we can't be in class just teaching the language as if it had nothing to do with the world. For Rita Segato, it's time to confront our Eurocentric school institutions and start educating subjects who are responsible for their communities and active in caring for society and nature. A good source of inspiration are indigenous scholars, such as Ailton Krenak, who made this wise and beautiful reflection at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mother Earth gives us free oxygen. She sends us to sleep and wakes us up again with the rising sun. She lets the birds sing and currents and winds flow. She creates this wonderful world for us to share, and what have we done in return? For Antonio Salles Rios Neto, we've been living an acute, progressive, and apparently inescapable civilizational crisis that has mainly manifested itself in the hastened devastation of ecosystems, in the increasing decline of democratic regimes, and in the manipulation of human life and behavior through the algorithmic revolution, or rather, evolution. Three other colleagues and I are writing an article in which we highlight that as language educators and language teacher educators, we have the challenge not only to critically reflect on the place of language education in this context of crisis, but also to make moves towards problematizing and dismantling the modern colonial view of progress that structures our area. After all, language and education are two of the most embedded and disputed elements in the civilizational process, a view that is defended by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. In his critical report of African colonization, he affirms that colonialism and its model of civilization were effected through the sword and the bullet. But the night of the sword and the bullet was followed by the morning of the chalk and the blackboard. It means that the physical violence of the battlefield, visibly brutal, was followed by the psychological violence of the classroom, visibly gentle. Now it's time to act against the rational, individual, and universal values and ideals of modernity coloniality, which were materialized by means of all sorts of violence. So we should search for alternatives to build a less unequal and more powerful, peaceful world. We have an important role to play in this scenario, since language is also at the service of inequality. And the way we language, we should use the term as a verb, and the worldview we enact have direct consequences on the lives of those around us and on the land. In this plenary, I'll thereby discuss a master thesis of a student of mine that shows possibilities for claiming language lessons as a site of resistance and re-existence. But first, I'm going to talk a bit about my locus of existence. As Silvestri and I wrote elsewhere, we see ourselves as located on the margins of hegemonic centers of economic, cultural, and knowledge production defined as the South, according to Menezes de Souza. Therefore, my talk presents a perspective from the South on problematizing or decolonizing language education and language teacher education in the field of applied linguistics. Besides, I'm a Brazilian female university professor of English residing in the Midwest of Brazil, here, very close to Brasilia, the capital of the country. I should underline that I'm mindful of my privileges and disadvantages. First, I have the privilege of being alive after the COVID-19 pandemic, but also of being, I have the privilege of being alive after the COVID-19 pandemic, but also of being able to breathe, having water and food, and I thank our planet for this. Second, I recognize my privilege of class. As a university professor, not a public school teacher, I'm considered high middle class according to the classification of the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics based on monthly familiar income. Third, I'm also aware of my privilege of race. I'm seen as white in the racial dynamics of my country. As for the disadvantages, I'm a woman in a very patriarchal and sexist society. My family is an example of this context, as I have a very authoritative and repressive father, and even today, when he's 91 years old, I have to submit to his orders to take care of him. So, if I'm here today, it's because I resisted his domination and struggled to make some choices in my life. I was very young when I realized that life was made of gender, class, religious, and institutional hierarchies. And here, by institutional, here I'm referring to school hierarchies. And I think it somehow relates to my immediate engagement with critical applied linguistics after reading in the 2000s texts by Alastair Pennycook, including his book, Critical Applied Linguistics, A Critical Introduction, published in 2001. These texts have changed our conception of language education, and since then, our research group has been working with critical and decolonial language education and language teacher education, problematizing social inequalities in terms of class, race, gender, sexuality, knowledge, and language. More specifically, we've grounded our work on some critical applied linguistics praxeologies. We've tried not to separate theory from practice or language from action. We've engaged with issues of power and inequality, aiming at their transformation. We've tried to have a historical understanding of social relations. We've reflected on our role in perpetuating inequalities and on our own limits concerning change. And we've searched dialogue with areas such as feminism, gender, queer, and class studies, and anti-racist pedagogy. Since 2015, we've read the authors of decolonial thought, and we've understood the importance of recognizing that there is a colonial matrix of power in the current world system, launched in the 16th century, which affects all dimensions of our social existence. Some of these dimensions we had already been working with, but now it made a lot more sense to see how these inequalities are a legacy of colonialism and should also be seen as colonialities. According to Grossfogel, the coloniality of power is an entanglement of multiple and heterogeneous hierarchies of forms of sexual, political, epistemic, economic, spiritual, linguistic, and racial domination. And the organizing principle that structures all the multiple hierarchies of the world system is the concept of race and racism, since it's the idea that organizes peoples into superior and inferior. As Grossfogel suggests, we should take seriously the subaltern side of the colonial difference, the side of the periphery, of workers, of women, of racialized, colonized individuals, of homosexuals and lesbians, and of anti-systemic movements that participate in the process of knowledge production. This image was taken from the clip Não Recomendado, Not Recommended, by Caio Prado, Daniel Chodon, and Diego Moraes. Inequality and coloniality strongly mark language education in several ways, which can be seen in the importance we give, for example, to the native speaker of English, to the standard norm of this language, to textbooks produced in the United States or in England, to teaching methods developed in these two countries, to the teaching of grammatical structures, and to the trivial approach to themes in the classroom. We should challenge and resist. These naturalized conceptions in our area. It's not easy at all, as a critical and decolonial attitude demands responsibility and the willingness to consider many perspectives. In our case, different ways of English, different conceptions of language, different teaching materials, different methods, different content, etc. It also requires questioning and deconstructing hierarchical structures of race, gender, heteropatriarchy, and class, which continue controlling our lives, knowledge, spirituality, and thought. Adolphe Alban, cited by Catherine Walsh, talks about re-existence, which are mechanisms that human groups implement as a strategy of questioning and making visible the practices of racialization, exclusion, and marginalization, aiming at redefining and resignifying life in conditions of dignity and self-determination. I believe this is Paulo Almeida da Silva. I believe Paulo Almeida da Silva, a master's student of mine, devised a strategy of questioning and making visible practices of racialization in Brazil by means of her master thesis titled Reflections on Race and Racism in the Classroom, a study with 2 Black teachers of English. It was defended in 2009, when decolonial thought was not on our horizon, but it confronts colonialities in many aspects. Her thesis is about her own existence as a Black woman and teacher, which means that her subjectivities and affection were always present in her research choices. It was built with, not about, 2 other Black teachers, and they built knowledge together that resulted from their lived experiences. I'd say it's embodied knowledge. It confronts the hierarchy between university and school, and the idea that school teachers merely apply the knowledge produced by university professors, and she argues in favor of teacher researchers. It defends that Black teachers talk to different groups out of the academia so that they can access different ways of thinking and living. She argues that being part of Black feminist movements, for example, is also education. Many of the authors, the researcher, and the researcher, and the teachers dialogue with are Black Brazilian authors. Sueli Carneiro, Lélia Gonzalez, Joel Rufino dos Santos, Nilma Lino Gomes, Kabengele Munanga, Petronila Beatriz Gonçalves e Silva, Aparecida de Jesus Ferreira, Carlos Moore, Milton Santos, Ronaldo Salles Júnior, and others. I'll present her thesis in a narrative, paraphrasing and quoting aspects that, in my opinion, stand out as critical and decolonial stance concerning race in our area. Paula is a Black teacher that graduated in Letras Portuguese English, licenciatura course. Yes, I say licenciatura. I think it's important to emphasize that because letras doesn't have the meaning. And I talked to Liliana, and she told me that your courses, they are called licenciaturas. In the introduction of her thesis, she talked about how difficult it was to write. Quote, I regard my writing as a confession of my painful secrets that every day remind me of my place in the world. She said she wrote about her experiences. My life story is present in every word. She paid tribute to her Black father who'd passed away. If it weren't for my father, I wouldn't write what I write now. He left me what was most beautiful and painful, his race. He lived with me for a short time, but he taught me that for Black people like us, fighting is the only way out. As a girl and teenager, she was the annoying Black, the stuck-up Black, the diligent Black, and as she stood out at school, she was also the intruder Black. As she let her hair grow natural, she was the crazy Black. When she started relating to men, she was faced with the fact that she had to be sexually hot. When she was a university student, she wondered why there were very few Black students or Black professors at the university. As a teacher and researcher, she thought her main role was to find strategies to fight the veiled Brazilian racism, which she felt in her skin everywhere she went to, and also in schools, where racial prejudices were reinforced and whiteness was celebrated. Or maybe I should use the present here. So for her, racial diversity was not just a theme to be addressed on the day for the abolition of slavery or on the Black Consciousness Day, but rather an opportunity to understand difference and different ways of life present in educational contexts. Besides, Paula highlighted that language plays a crucial role in the perpetuation of racism. She asked, how do we demean people, Black people, by saying what they are, where they can go, what they can be, how they should dress, what they should work on, etc. Based on Whedon, she argued that language must be understood as a set of competing discourses that assign meaning to in the world. And as such, it becomes an important site of political struggle. She added, grounded on Mukherjee, that the naive structure of the content in English language teaching is directed towards making students assimilate into a structural order, a cultural order, a linguistic order, and above all, a racist order. She chose to do her research with two Black English teachers, Dalila and Asvita, who worked with her as English teachers at the Language Center of the Universidade Federal de Goiás. Why Black teachers? To make Black people visible in the academic world and to share life stories, teacher education, and struggles with other teachers who were Black like her. Her research questions were, what are the teachers' conceptions of race and racism? How do teachers address race and racism in the classroom? What are the consequences of participating in the research for their personal and professional life? Well, today we wouldn't use the term consequences, as we don't believe it's possible to have control over our actions and its consequences in teacher education. We agree with Lopes and Borges when they say that the results of our work will always be different from what was planned, since it will be interpreted differently by different people. The research consisted in 7 reflective sessions held in 2007, in which they discussed 3 topics: the teachers' lessons and race and racism in their lessons, texts about race and racism, and texts that connect these 2 themes with education and gender. Besides, a questionnaire was applied at the beginning of the research in order to know the participants' ideas about race, racism, and education. Another questionnaire was applied 2 years after the reflective sessions so that the teachers could talk about the research and their teaching in the new work environment. The study is a recherche-formation, a type of research that is proposed by Marie-Christine Jossot, because when the participants and the research participant talked about themselves and their teaching concerning their race and racism, they were producing not only knowledge about teaching, but also building their subjectivities. By doing this, they could have a greater understanding of how racism challenged them and how they could act proactively as teachers. In the theoretical background titled Race and Racism in Brazil, Paula discussed these themes: the Black population in Brazil, a brief history, racism and the Black population, consequences of racism in Brazil, the race towards whitening, the denial of racism in Brazil, language and racism, teacher education and critical teaching, and critical language teaching. Concerning the first research question, the teachers had some previous conceptions of race and racism written in the initial questionnaire, but their accounts became much more critical and embodied when they discussed the text and talked about past experiences in the reflective sessions. They made some general reflections such as the myth that Brazil is a racial democracy is very strong. Black people deny their Blackness because they want to avoid racism. Color marginalization leads to class marginalization. Black color is related to failure, poverty, bad omens, suffering, mourning, and non-intellectual work. There is always an attempt to attenuate Blackness linguistically, aesthetically, and even biologically by marrying white partners. Why marry a Black man or a Black woman when surely you can find something better? They also made reflections concerning themselves. They mentioned being discriminated against by means of jokes, evil looks, distrust, and being treated differently from white people in some places. An example was given of a fancy shop. People refused to call them Black because they were not that Black. They were called morenas or mulatas. I don't know if I could translate that for brown or mestizas. There is a large number of terms, more than 100, used to avoid the term Black in Brazil. They also discussed Black women. They are seen as sexual objects. They are more predisposed to sex than white women. They have an innate ability to care for people, a reference to the Mãe Preta, the slave woman who was totally dedicated to domestic work during slavery. As for how they addressed race and racism in their English lessons, in the initial questionnaire, Dalila affirmed she'd never done it, but Masvita had already brought an African song to her class. She revised the alphabet, discussed the lyrics, elicited what they knew about Africa, asked why Black people came to Brazil, and what they understood by racism. She noticed the Black student didn't participate in it. And when Masvita asked if they wanted to listen to the song again, she said, "I don't." However, Masvita continued working on racism and slavery in the following lesson. In an initial discussion in the reflective session, Masvita and Dalila mentioned some challenges concerning addressing topics like race and racism in their English lessons. It was difficult to discuss topics at beginner levels because of students' incipient language level. Black people were not represented in the textbook adopted. It was racist. The students expected English lessons to be neutral and fun. They wanted trivial topics, grammatical items, and practice. However, for Masvita and Dalila, social reality had to be discussed in class and they believed that their work could contribute to deconstruct racist practices that affected Black men and women and made them suffer daily. Both teachers developed together class activities aimed at understanding and deconstructing racism in Brazil. As Mavita taught English 1, she tried to deconstruct stereotypes that place Black people in fixed positions. When teaching professions, she brought Black people in prestigious professions, doctors, scholars, entrepreneurs, pilots, musicians, etc. When she brought a film, she chose the film Bruce Almighty, in which God is a Black man played by Morgan Freeman. When she taught a family tree, she brought a Black family. However, she didn't promote discussions, as the students didn't have repertoires to discuss racism, but she thought that what she did was enough to make them reflect on the image they had of Black people. She mentions that when she showed a Black guy holding a violin, a student said, "He's a rapper." And the teacher asked, "A rapper with a violin?" At the end, Masvita said she was happy with her lessons because the students felt comfortable and seemed to have approved her approach. Dalila, on her turn, taught English 8, so the students could communicate their ideas. By means of videos, small text, and pictures, the students discussed Brazilian morenidade, brownness, being Black and white in Brazil, in the US, reverse racism, Brazil seen as a Black country, and the difficulty in defining our own racial identity. In the beginning, Dalila noticed a certain discomfort on the part of the students. She believed it was because studying how language teaching can perpetuate racist practices was not an agenda in the language center curriculum at the time of the research. A statement that was affirmed more than once was that there isn't racism in Brazil, but in the United States, the situation is more serious. However, Dalila gave her personal account as a Black woman in the classroom. One of her arguments was that she'd been discriminated against in a shop, and a student reacted, "I don't believe you were discriminated against because you're not Black, or you're not that Black." In spite of this remark, she believed her account stimulated her students' perception of our racist reality. Besides, in an assignment in which they were supposed to write stories about racism, stories of discrimination against Black women were prevalent. Dalila made a booklet with the best stories written by the students, and I'm going to summarize one of them. Here's the story. Here, of course, it's a summary, okay? DSC told the story of a female Somalian physicist who went to Pretoria, South Africa, to make a speech in a great summit on sustainable development. It's a coincidence. That's why I chose this story, because of the theme of the event. She decided to buy new clothes to participate in the event, but she was discriminated against in the clothing store and in a restaurant soon afterwards. After she made her speech about global warming, the audience applauded her, but a white man who disagreed with her research threw a stone at her face and she died. Of course, she went to hospital, but eventually she died. Black people around the world were shocked and organized a massive protest against racism worldwide. All the other 5 stories had the same tragic tone. I wonder if they did it because they became aware of how violent racism is, or because they wanted to please their Black teacher. 2 years after Paula generated the research material, Paula, Dalila, and Masvita had become English teachers in the Municipal Education Network of Goiânia, the capital of my state, Goiás, and Paula applied the final questionnaire. Dalila and Masvita said that they continued teaching English from a critical perspective, and they realized the relevance of discussing race and racism in this new educational context, as the majority of the students were Black, silenced, and led to think that there was no racism in Brazil. The teachers agreed they had more freedom to do it in this context compared to the language school where they had worked, and the students were more responsive to it. Besides, Dalila started participating in a study group on identity practices in which issues of race, such as race and racism, were addressed, and Masvita was writing her literature master thesis on a female African author. Both of them affirmed they were much more committed to the anti-racist cause, and they started seeing language not simply as a means of communication, but as a means of domination and resistance, since it can perpetuate or fight racism. Paula was surprised to hear that Dalila had stopped straightening her hair. She said she felt better and more beautiful with her new Black style, and that she could deal better with the conflicts she had with her white boyfriend. Paula's thesis is one of the studies in our research group that emphasizes that our teaching and discursive practices are powerful and political. As these practices build our subjectivities, our social relations, and the world, we should ask ourselves if our language lessons have contributed to this civilizational crisis, knowing that not fighting against it is a way of contributing to it. As I said, as language teachers, we should take action. We can find this inspiration in the issues addressed by the SDGs, and we should also approach themes such as racism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, if we want peace and prosperity for everybody in the planet. It's urgent that we start problematizing and resisting inequalities or colonialities and make space for new ways of knowing, less hierarchical and more ecological, and new ways of existing. I end with this question. What has English teaching made of us? Oh, sorry. It's the other slide. Sorry, I didn't. Yes. So I end with this question. What has English teaching made of us? What can we make of English teaching? Gracias.
Okay, Rossane, thank you so much for this brilliant presentation. Thank you so much for making us reflect about this issue on resistance and re-existence in terms of our teaching and our education. It's time now for some questions, comments, even people who are hearing in a virtual way. It's time to open to the mics or write your question on the chat. Yes.
Can I stop sharing?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, it's time to discuss. Here, well, if we don't have any question, I really want to have one of them. Yes, Rossane. And it refers, yes, I have a question in this moment with your presentation. And it refers to, because you talk about Adolfo Albana Chinte, that is, even he's a Colombian man here. He works with Catherine Walsh as well. And he talks about some creative practices to re-exist. Yes, the music, the art, yes, a lot of things regarding these processes. How can we, as language teachers, yes, in Colombia and Brazil, yes, maybe from your point of view in Brazil, what kind of strategies, what kind of creative practices, as Adolfo mentioned, can we use inside and outside the classroom to promote English, not to colonize, but to decolonize our minds?
Yes, Edson, I think that's what what Paulo Almeida did. Yes, I mean,
yes.
to work with Black teachers, yes, and to develop knowledge about not only about what's been about academic knowledge about Blackness, about race and racism, but talking about their own experiences. And I think it should apply to all the other areas, such as sexuality and gender. I think we should bring these discussions to class, yes, and listen to the students. I think this is very important. Listen to the students and also try to dialogue with authors who are also thinking about these issues that we think that are relevant, yes, in our lessons.
Okay. Also, okay. No, we have here just Juan Pablo Arias. Okay. I don't know if we have another question or another comment. No.
Can I ask a question? I'd like
Sure.
to.
Sure.
Like to know. I mean, when I presented the master thesis, do you see that these issues they are present in Colombia as well? I mean, racism and this. Well, if Colombian, I mean, if there, I'd like to know if there are many Black people in Colombia, because here in Brazil, 60% of the population is Black. Yes, and if there is racism and discrimination, and if you've been working with this in your lessons.
Yes, of course. Yes. I don't know if someone wants to answer. Well, or in this case, yes, I can say, Rossane, that we have a similar situation. Even I can talk, and sorry, I'm going to talk from my own experience. In this moment, I'm doing my doctoral program in Brazil, specifically in Piauí. And here in Colombia, also we have very similar populations where we find several issues that make us to reflect about what kind of activities do we need to have for our classroom. For example, how can we engage our students' realities to teach something inside and outside the classroom? Yes, but here in Colombia also we have those problematics. Yes, we have different issues in terms of poverty, in terms of racism. Yes, even because you are our neighborhoods. Yes, so we are close here and we share a lot of realities in those terms.
Yes. Now, looking at the audience, I can say that there aren't many Black people. Yes. I'd like to ask if there are, I don't know if you know the number of students, of Black students at the university, but do you think there are lots of Black people at the university?
Sure.
And
yes.
Black teachers?
Yes. Yes, Black yes.
Yeah?
Yes, even I don't know if I am wrong. Yes, but I consider myself as a Black person. So it's interesting to see how can we put our realities in this context. And yes, Universidad de Antioquia even has a lot of faculties, yes, and other places where we attend different population, indigenous people, yes, Black people, yes, and a lot of people who make us to reflect and to reshape every single time our teaching practices, yes, because we need to involve those realities as well, yes, but of course, we have a lot of Black people, yes, in a lot of sexual diversities that we need to have in mind, yes.
Yes, and would you say that that language teaching in different contexts, if grammar is the focus of language education in different contexts? At university, for example.
Well, we are trying to go beyond the grammar, yes, the structure. Yes, we need to identify that grammar is just, yes, it's important, and we are studying linguistics, yes, and apply linguistics. That is part of also of our content, but it's not essential, yes, because we need to go beyond the structure, yes, and we need to read the word and the world, as Paulo Freire mentioned, yes, and we need to attend our students' realities. We need to attend even literacy as a social practice when we can go beyond and read those necessities and those elements that we have in mind every single time. Yes, it's necessary to go beyond the grammar, yes, if we want to transcend or to give a meaningful learning and a meaningful teaching as well.
Okay.
Yes. What about grammar in Brazil, Rossane?
Yeah, no, as I said, Brazil is a very big country, so there is this critical movement, yes, in our area, in different contexts, especially, for example, in some groups, yes, that, as I said, are linked to this critical literacies national project. In fact, it's literacies national project, but we are discussing critical literacies, yeah. So in many contexts we can find it, but the majority of educational contexts still the teaching in the majority of teaching contexts, especially language centers, are very traditional and very conservative.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. People who is in the auditorium, you can participate as well.
We invite you to respond to Professor Rocha Pessoa's questions or comments, or share some of your experiences. The mics are here. We have a very, very shy audience this afternoon. If there are no comments, yes, I would like to.
Yes, go on, Adriana.
Okay, no, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, and I think that your reflection, as Edison said, is very, very interesting. And I don't know about people who are so shy today, but I found a lot of similarities between what you said and the situation in Colombia. We are racially diverse, and we also have Black population in Colombia. And what you said, this is not my area of expertise or my area of research, but what you said is very similar. It's how some Black people have faced the same issues that you're describing in your research, and the same types of relationships that they establish among themselves or with other people, trying to avoid confrontation and, in many cases, avoiding discriminatory practices. But we do have that. It's very similar. and especially in this part of Colombia where we are. So in this region, we are particularly sexist, racist, and we have many of those discriminatory practices. I just want to mention that a couple of years ago, we did some study on teachers in the state of Antioquia that is geographically and racially diverse. So we are very, very different. So the regions encompass lots of people with different backgrounds and practices. And one Black teacher that came to our state to teach, she's from a neighbor state, Chocó, where the majority of the population are Black. She came to teach English in a small town in her state. And she said that she had a very hard time finding housing for her and her child. So people in that small town where there are many white, blonde, and green and blue-eyed people found her different, and she felt highly discriminated. She had to stay in a hotel for more than she thought because people wouldn't rent her a room or a house. They said her culture. So she was seen as different. It is her culture. And people thought she would not pay the rent, or either she would steal something from the house she was renting, or probably she wouldn't be able to be as polite and behave as she was expected. So that was part of the testimony of one of the teachers that we interviewed. And that was, pretty interesting. Just, something similar to what you have mentioned.
Yes, that's
okay. No more comments or questions? Maybe this audience needs coffee. Thank you. Rossane, Nelson, thank you very much. And this is an opportunity for...
Yes.
Yes, Rossane, muito obrigado por ficar aqui conosco. A gente aprende muito de você mesmo e lê muito você. Então, é uma honra ficar aqui com você e falamos aqui português para você ficar aqui na casa mesmo, seja virtual. E reconhecemos justamente todas essas dificuldades que a gente tem, mas você está nos nossos corações, né?
Muito obrigada. Eu quero voltar não. Agora eu quero ir a Medellín, né? A Liliana me disse que ela quer que eu faça uma palestra, uma plenária, plenary there. So I hope I can go and we can talk more about critical teaching, critical education, and critical and colonial, decolonial education.
You are more than welcome. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now it is time for us to move into the concurrent sessions. Thank you.